Hi, I'm Denise Hummel, and I'm the founder and CEO of Lead Inclusively, and I have the pleasure of being with Maya Huchan, who is the president of Global Leadership Associates. Maya and I have had the opportunity to work together on a number of occasions, and now we get to pick her brain for some thought leadership on the innovative mindset. Maya, it's so nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Denise, for inviting me for this podcast.
Oh, absolutely. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So my name is Maya Huchan, and I am specialized in global leadership and cross-cultural management. So I am a author, speaker, consultant, and executive coach.
And when I work with Maya, I have the good fortune of having her expertise on the cross-cultural side. So we're able to work together in such a way that we can localize a lot of our diversity and inclusion initiatives, particularly in China, where she's from, but throughout the world. So we're going to talk to her a little bit about the whole concept of having an innovation mindset. And I will say that this issue is, as you know, very near and dear to my heart because we are very, very devoted to the premise that there is a strong connection between inclusion and innovation, both in the way that it accelerates innovation as well as in the way that it increases the quality of innovation, the interaction, the general ability to share thought leadership. So, Maya, if you don't mind, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about an innovative mindset, and more particularly, how do you cultivate that in an organization?
Sure. You know, Denise, in this day and age, that if the organization can be innovative, and that is a competitive advantage, right?
Significantly.
Absolutely. So when you think about in today's world, a lot of research has shown that leaders and employees in an organization are not satisfied with the way that the speed and also the quality of their innovation. A recent study from McKinsey have talked about 94% of the executives in the organizations are unhappy or dissatisfied with their innovative performance in an organization. That's a huge waste of talent.
It sure is.
Yeah, but this is something that the leaders can do to make a big impact by cultivating this climate so people can innovate, they can be creative, and the leadership makes a big difference.
So how do they do that?
Well, so when you think about leadership in an innovative mindset, I look at it in two different ways. First of all is that leaders need to think about, what can I do to lead differently? How can I look at my role in a different way? And then so I can show up differently, and I can act differently, and I can interact with my team differently, so that people can truly be creative and innovative. So think about, how can you be creative as a leader? And number two is that, how can leader create this innovative environment, this climate, so that allow people to apply innovative thoughts or speak up and share their innovative ideas with the rest of the group, with the rest of the team. So the question is not about how can I make innovation happen, but it's really about how can I set the stage so other people can innovate. Mm-hmm. So I look at innovative leadership in those two different ways.
Right. So one of the ways that we do that with inclusion is actually encouraging leaders to recognize members of their team for ideas and experimentation and learning agility without regard to the actual outcome. In other words, was the particular idea or initiative successful, for example? What are some of the other ways that leaders can show up with that innovative mindset to encourage active participation and the expression of ideas in their teams?
So when I look at leaders to lead with innovative mindset, I look at three different ways. Okay, number one is to lead inclusively, and that's the name of your company.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wow, and I didn't even pay her to say that.
Absolutely, and that's the first
That's
and
great.
Foremost, right?
Yeah.
Is that how do you lead inclusively?
Right.
I think that for leaders to create that climate, you have to be able to cultivate this psychological safety. We have heard this term recently quite often. Now, this is coming from the research from Google. Mm-hmm. Now, so Google studied 180 teams all over the world. and try to identify what makes the team work really effectively and work well together. And they identify two elements. And one of them is that they notice that the best teams, that people have about equal amount of time to share and to speak at meetings. So they call that conversation turn taking. Okay, so everybody,
as opposed to one person dominating and the more introverted among the team never getting a voice.
Absolutely. So no, that's something that we want to avoid. So a good team that they bring everybody together and encourage everybody to speak about the same amount of time, regardless if they're naturally introverted or they're quiet or with language barriers. And so at the end of the meeting, everybody felt like I have said what I want to say, and they have expressed their opinions. And so that really is number one thing, is that people feel safe in this environment. They can speak up. They don't feel being judged. They don't have to feel like being punished or rejected for speaking up.
So does it help then for the leader to set out sort of the rules of engagement at the beginning? We're not going to be talking over each other. We're going to maybe even create an agenda so that everyone knows that they're going to have time to participate, and maybe even when they're going to participate, perhaps, depending on the cultural norm for that particular society.
Yes, and I think leaders really need to set the tone, right? To set those ground rules that how can people contribute, and how do we actively listen and allow everybody else to contribute ideas in their ways, in their own way. So the leader really should kind of set those ground rules and then start cultivating this kind of practice so everybody feels comfortable to speak up.
Yeah.
So that's number one, right? And the second thing about creating psychological safety is that people usually have very high sense of social sensitivity. Right? So they pay attention. They look at each other and say, well, if somebody seems uncomfortable, they seem upset, or whether it's their body language or those nonverbal cues, they pay attention, they tune in.
So they have high EQ and good observation skills, and they're not just looking at what people are saying or not saying, but also their facial expressions, maybe their body posture, the reactivity that they're having in there, which of course that in itself changes from culture to culture as well.
That's correct.
But the point I think you're making is just to really see the whole person and not just listen to the words.
Yes. And then to be able to get to know your team members so they know that what kind of behaviors that seem to show that you're not engaged, or perhaps you're not happy with something that we just talked about, and then you shut down. So those are some of the things that people have within a good team, is that high social connectivity and sensitivity. So when they have both elements together that works in the team, then we call that psychological safety. So when people feel both comfortable, safe, and not being judged, and then they can relax.
Right.
And then they will be able to share their thoughts and it's not afraid of being judged or criticized or even punished.
Let's talk about some of the ways that leaders can be reflective about what they see, for example, or experience at meetings. In other words, after they're at the meeting and maybe they notice some individuals participating quite a bit, some not at all. What's a good way for them to be reflective and to take the time to ask how they could show up differently next time?
Yeah, when I work with global teams, very often that the different cultural will show up differently. Like we mentioned earlier, that some people are just naturally quieter, and some culture they are more hierarchical, so they wait for the leaders to say. To really call the shots and then dominate the meetings, or to allow the native speakers of English, for example, to dominate a meeting. And so leaders really need to be mindful about those type of behaviors and dynamics in the team. And at the end of the team, before each meeting, just kind of be real clear about what do I want to accomplish? How do I want to be engaging with my team members? how can I be more inclusive, right?
Right.
And then have some specific behaviors that in mind. And not only the leader need to lead by example, they also need to encourage the rest of the team to all embrace that behaviors.
One thing that I notice is that it's particularly difficult when you're dealing across cultures on virtual calls. And, particularly for those companies that are headquartered in the United States, the expectation is, okay, we're going to get on a call. I want your ideas, people, and in the U.S. we call that brainstorming, which is supposed to set up this, innovative atmosphere. When in certain cultures, it has the exact opposite impact, right? You haven't given people any advance notice that you want their ideas. People are trying to give the leader preferential treatment to some extent, might feel that they might cause the leader of the call to lose face, are not wanting to just sort of spew the way we do in the U.S. Well, I have this idea. And so, so my question is, with regard to virtual calls in particular, what can leaders do to give space to others on these calls, particularly from cultures where saving face is really a big issue?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up this topic of saving face. Okay, that's actually a passion of mine, to really kind of looking at this dynamic and how can we make sure that not only everybody get to save face, and also we give face to each other, meaning that we're inclusive, that we bring everybody's voice into the room. So one thing that leaders have done that successfully in a global team setting, especially in the virtual calls, is to really kind of keep notes on who already talked about this topic and who he has not heard from.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And to continue to keep track and then bring out the people that, ask specifically about their opinion to share when the quieter members have not had a chance to talk.
Explain to the audience, if you don't mind. Most people know what saving face means. Explain what giving face means.
Well, so giving face, it's really about thinking about how you can build people up, how you can lift them up, and then to build their confidence. So you can say things that you can give public recognition to someone and to acknowledge their contribution or affirm their ideas. So, and it just kind of really in a way to build them up so that to make them feel and look good in front of others.
Okay, but this brings up a very interesting point, though. That works pretty well in individualist cultures where individual recognition is, wanted and expected. How does that sometimes backfire in collectivist nations like China, for example?
Absolutely. Well, China is changing. Yeah.
Right.
China, as we know that, has had this one-child policy for decades. And they recently changed. So
that connection is to become more individualistic based on the smaller family size?
Absolutely.
I didn't even consider that.
The younger generation that the kids were born, in after the 1980s, they're the only child in their family. So then this individualistic sort of expectation is really changing the Chinese culture, right? If you look at this whole new generation, they want to be different and they do want it to be recognized. So, but you're right, certain collective cultures, collectivism culture, they definitely feel sometimes uncomfortable being recognized in public. So as a leader, you need to take the time to really understand each individual will have different preference. And not just cultural differences, even within the United States, for example, you have people who are more introverted. Naturally, they don't like to be put on the spot and being recognized, even it's for good reason. Right. It's for positive reason.
It can still backfire.
So you can give face or give recognition to somebody in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be do it in public. You can do it individually
on a one-on-one
base, and you can certainly do it, much more low-key. But the key here is to make the other person feel that they're appreciated, they're valued, and they're also respected.
It's interesting because a client just said to me recently with regard to some of our programs, are we absolutely sure that the whole concept of inclusion shows up the same in each culture. And of course, there are going to be very significant variations to that. And the maturity model of this work is very different, and the priorities are very different. But in general, would you say that the concept of inclusion is global in nature, in the sense that it brings out the best in people no matter where they are in the world?
Yes, I would definitely agree to that statement. I think that it's human nature that we wanted to engage with people, and then we wanted to do our best work. And we certainly wanted to express our opinions and thoughts, particularly when we work with knowledge workers, right? Knowledge workers have ideas, and they like to solve problems. And so they like to share their thoughts with others. So they want to make a difference. So it's important for us to continue to be inclusive when we work with knowledge workers, regardless which culture. That the key is that to think about how can we give them face to bring them in, and then continue to acknowledge their contribution, and then what can we do to avoid losing face so that they don't feel like, well, if I have to say something perfect, I can't afford to to say anything stupid. But then, when you think about being cause somebody to lose face, it really can be very subtle. It sometimes in one culture, nobody ever thought about this will be a problem. But then for certain culture, that it can be devastating for people. Yeah. So, it's, and let me give you an example, when it comes to, how cultural differences can make a difference. Now at Agilent, Agilent Technologies, I was a coach, was their senior executive, at Agilent. And they, this particular executive was in charge of technology, okay, and in innovation. So she told me that we encourage innovation from all cultures, from people from all over the world. And they always provide them with the kind of encouragement and positive recognition. They never use this one word at work. Guess what that word is?
No.
Close. They never use the word failure.
Yeah.
This is the word that's not
because
even in their
failure is just an experiment with a different outcome that we learn from and then move on, right?
Right.
That makes great sense.
Yeah, what they say is that after when they're working on projects, and they would periodically reflect and reevaluate, and then if something doesn't work, instead of saying we failed, they would say, what's next?
What's next?
What's next? What do we do next? No failure.
All right. I have one last question before we have to say goodbye. To what extent, obviously there are some cultures that are more hierarchical than others.
Yes.
To what extent does hierarchy and the emphasis on hierarchy and levels and roles act as an impediment to inclusion, and are there any ways around it?
Hierarchy is real in many cultures. So for leaders to break down the hierarchy, it could be very difficult to do. However, what they can do is that when they work with their team, kind of create this atmosphere is that in this space that we all equal, all the ideas are equal, and then in fact they ask everybody else to contribute first before the leader speak up.
Right.
And then so people are not always look up to the leader and say, well, what do you think? Well, if whatever you say, it's what we're going to do. It's always, that's automatically a hierarchy become, an obstacle, right? So the best thing that I've seen leaders do very well is to say, I want to hear all your ideas, and there's no bad ideas. Let's just share.
Yeah.
Okay. And then he doesn't or she doesn't say anything until the very end, but again, it does not place any judgment in people's ideas.
Awesome.
So it wait until the end to share that.
That's awesome. That's a great technique. I'm here with Maya Hu Chan, and we've had a great time together. Thank you so much for attending the podcast, and we're really looking forward to the next opportunity to share.